Welcome to the ITOT Insider Podcast. And David, I think this is the first one of 2026.
Yep.
Now, we're going to start this time with somebody who works in the field, who works in refinery, has lots of experience with data and production. Who did you bring this time, David?
Willem, I'm extremely excited to have Kris here with us, Kris Doering. I think he embodies the topics we'd love to. No pressure, Kris.
But I only embody them. I mean, what can I do?
Yeah. But I'm sure he embodies the topics we'd love to discuss about data, about cooperation, about becoming better at our jobs. And Kris done that at several companies. But I'm not gonna try to tell your story. So Kris, first of all, thanks for joining us. And why don't you kick this episode off with a bit of an introduction about yourself?
For sure. Yeah. Thanks, David. Thanks, Willem. As you said, my name's Kris Doering. I've had a pretty broad-ranging career doing a lot of different things. But what's been most interesting about it to me is that data has really been a common thread through the whole career, and no matter where I worked, what field I worked in. So that's it's really been the thing that's tied all of my roles together. What I do now, I just recently took a role about a month ago at Sask Energy, which is a government-owned corporation that has the monopoly on transportation and delivery of natural gas in my home province of Saskatchewan. We do, system modeling to determine the assets that we need to set up in the gas delivery and transportation system. We kind of help manage projects and things like that. Obviously, all of the simulation and modeling that we do is very data intensive. And without good data practices, you can run into problems, errors, or just a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
It can be very manual if you don't have good data practices. So just starting that and working with a team of people here. I'm not a representative of Sask Energy, so these views are mine, and it's very important that I say that. But other than that, I should be able to speak pretty freely.
So now we have to skip all the confidential modeling questions. Willem, damn.
yeah, right. No, yeah. I can't tell you all of the secrets of Saskatchewan gas transportation that I'm sure you're super interested in. Yeah, that's true.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so that's your job now since a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
What did you do before moving into the energy or gas distribution sector?
For sure. David. Before that, we probably got to know each other through the Teradata Possible conference in 2025. At the time, I was presenting on a project that I was working on in the data warehouse kind of business intelligence space, and I was working for a company called the Cooperative Refinery Refinery Complex. In also a refinery in Regina, Saskatchewan, and it's a medium-sized refinery. It's a very complex refinery, and what I was doing there is I was the superintendent of it's been so long. It's been a month. I haven't done my elevator speech on that place in a while. I was the superintendent of refinery performance improvement, and so we did goal setting, strategic planning, that kind of thing. I call that outcomes and indicators. That facet of work. We did benchmarking. There's a really large benchmarking study in refineries called Solomon. About 85% of the world's refining capacity subscribes to that, and we were being really successful as a team inside of a refinery with no sibling refiners. The company only has one, and so it's really important to do that benchmarking work for them. And we were being really successful. Solomon was really pleased with the work that we were doing in that area, and we were helping get good value to the business, understanding what it is, how we were performing. Before that, I worked at the refinery in process safety, which is a very data intensive role for sure. I was doing incident investigation a lot. We did deploy a HSC software suite there, though, which was obviously very data heavy. And then before that, I was working in equipment reliability, rotating assets, so like pumps and that sort of thing, motors, and that was at Mosaic at a Belle Plaine solution mine facility. And they have a facility right nearby now, actually owned by K+S, another solution mine. for potash. Before that, I worked at Canada Post for almost 10 years. I think maybe it was 7 years or something. And Willem and I have that in common, working in postal industry. Which is a fascinating industry. There's a lot of data there. I worked on a number of IT projects, strangely, at that place, and I did a lot of work in Lean Six Sigma, so continuous improvement. I became passionate about that, and that really helped with equipment reliability and helps me all the time now. I was just in someone's office, kind of learning about the business here, talking about IT, and that somebody just popped their head into my office here. That work really kind of like has prepared me for all of the other stuff that I've done. And that person was talking about all of the interconnected data systems and was really happy that I knew Lean, because then I would know processes, and that was really important to her. And then before that, my first job, kind of out of school, was working at a small consultancy, and we did a lot of work delivering PI systems to upstream gas producers in Alberta. And so, one of the, we had a pretty significant Pi server. The company we were working for had an unlimited license for Pi tags. And so they ended up installing a server at every site. Yeah, it was awesome. It was great.
Good old
I'm
days.
ruined as a Pi person because everything was cheap. Yeah. Why don't we just bring it all in? That's always the answer. Yeah, why not? Yeah, which I say still, and the data warehousing people generally don't like that. They like to be more organized, which I've learned is important for sure. So, we bring in a lot of data, and then all of the different site collector servers would then centralize into a central server, and it allowed the engineers at head office to do good work with near real-time data. It was a really lengthy process before, very manual, as how they got the data off of charts and recorded it, sent it to the government, and ended up getting the data 6 months to a year later. And that's what they used. For like placing compressors and things like that, making $1 million decisions, and not just working off old data, and the well pressures and flows change very dramatically, especially at first. And so if you're doing a lot of drilling activity, all of the dynamic situation can mean that you can't make good decisions without timely data. So that really impressed upon me the importance of getting real time or near real time data in.
Okay.
So that's a bit about my career. Yeah.
Lots of different things. I mean, I think that's also interesting. It's like there's something to be said to have been working 20 years in one field, but I think also if you go in different fields, you bring something from that with you. And it's super rare that I get to talk to anybody about the postal world. I mean, I only
we could
did
have a whole episode about that.
I had a short stint of a year, so I mean, definitely not the same as you. But I also found it super interesting, and I think that people don't immediately think about postal as manufacturing. So I know that you know that that's absolutely not true. It is. Maybe you can give some insights to our listeners what it's like.
Yeah. So and especially so working at lots of companies, what ends up happening is you start to learn the importance of the context, right? So like the ownership structure. Canada Post is a crown corporation. A lot of postal companies are, but a lot of delivery, like parcel delivery companies, aren't, for example, right? And so that just kind of the nuances of like the legal situation in Canada with respect to Canada Post owning the monopoly rights to delivering letters but not parcels was a really, really interesting aspect of that work. But that's neither here nor there. As far as manufacturing goes, in Regina, Saskatchewan, it's a small place in the middle of a big country. And so we didn't get a lot of letters, and we didn't send a lot of letters. We didn't get a lot of parcels. We didn't send a lot of parcels. But in all, we had to deal with that anyway. There had to be a lot of infrastructure. So you're getting things off of you're getting semi loads of mail. Would you call a semi trailer? Is that right?
Yeah, semi truck.
Truck. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Truck. Yeah. So you get whatever they are, 52-foot semi trailers pulling in multiple times a day, full of mail, whether it was advertising mail or at the time newspapers were still a bit of a thing. You'd have parcels. Amazon was coming on, and that was a big drop every day for us. There were small mailers that like manufacturers in Saskatchewan that needed to get their product out, and that was a big thing as well. There was I remember there was like a website that sold wedding stuff, and there was another guy who invented a machine where you'd flick a switch and a little finger would come out and flick the switch off.
I know that one.
Yeah, there was a guy who invented that or whatever, and I think it was in Regina or in Saskatchewan. Really? Saskatchewan anyway. Yeah, so we'd get a drop from him once a week. And so you see all this interesting mail going by. Of course, you'd mail live bees in the springtime. The little baby chickens, the chicks. You'd mail the chicks, and they'd all be squawking down there, chirping away. Um, so it was just fascinating. You had to know a lot about geography. Where all the roads went, and the mail had to follow the roads. But the real key thing was not because you don't make a lot per letter. You've got to make sure that you don't touch each piece very often. You want to touch it as few times as possible. And so it would come in a big container, and inside that big shipping container, you'd have a smaller container, and inside that smaller container, you'd have all these little pieces of mail, and you'd want to like touch it once, and it'd be destined for the end destination. Another interesting thing about that is because of that containerization, you ended up having to it was almost manufacturing where you disassemble the machine and then reassembled a different machine all of the time, which made it different. And you had to manage the containers as much as the mail.
Really? I
And
didn't
because
know
you were
that.
always thinking about the
Yeah.
mail and the addressing the mail and where the
Yeah.
mail had to go, it was easy to forget about the containers, but it was half of the work. Because you had to get empty containers to a spot where you could fill them up, and you had to get full containers empty so that you could fill those ones up, and you had to get full containers out, and you had to get full containers in. And so the container movement was actually some of the biggest stuff that you did.
There's a lot of logistics happening. You get, and
Mhm.
also you have like a different movement. You get like central places where the mail comes in to be sorted, to be routed to
Yeah.
different places. So it comes in a place and then it fans out back to different places for
Mm,
distribution afterwards.
yeah.
And there you want
Yeah, that
things to
spoken hub
go
stuff. Yeah.
fast. You have
Hmm.
stuff like how much work in progress do I have? Do I have
Hmm.
some letters waiting behind? Are
Hmm.
machines being used properly?
Yeah. Yeah. So that is very interesting. Because of the volume of mail not being really big in Regina, and some of the management of kind of like how that spoken hub kind of system would work was centrally managed. I didn't do a lot of that aspect. So I mostly did work within my own province. At the time, though, we were working on a project where we were modernizing mail delivery and kind of like changing the mail delivery model, and working to get away from door-to-door delivery. And so that's something. There's currently a labor dispute going on at Canada Post, actually, and it's still about that issue. And it looks like part of it will be reducing the amount of door-to-door delivery that happens, and kind of mixing the parcel delivery and the letter mail delivery together. And so we replaced all of this mail sorting machines. And so these are machines that sort 40, 50,000 pieces an hour of letter mail, and going, the mail is just flying through there, and automatically sorting that, being fed by a person, being swept by a person, but not, the person's not doing any sorting. And we replaced all of the machines in Saskatchewan, all the mechanized sorting machines. Um, and really, one of the things is also that we had a legislated delivery standard. So it wasn't so much the kind of the business side of like next door in the morning or something like that, which also happened with parcels, but with letter mail it was legislated mail standard. And so it was really carefully managing, like, this is all a Monday's mail, and we need to deliver it by Monday, but not earlier than Monday, because then you're over processing. And so there's a really interesting system of like managing the inventory by day. um, a lot of visual management too, right? So like making sure that the work made sense. So it would be things like, you'd paint travel pathways on the floor, or tape travel pathways on the floor. And you'd have workers that would tell you, like, I've worked here a long time. I don't follow that stuff anyways, right? And then you'd talk to someone who would say that, and you'd say, well, like, have you ever parked in a gravel parking lot? Yeah. And how was that experience? Like, what was it like? Well, cars are parked everywhere. And then you'd say, well, have you ever parked in a paved one, with the lines on it? Well, yeah. Well, what's that like? Well, I mean, people like, generally park in the lines, and every once in a while somebody parks between the lines and people get mad at them, right? And people naturally follow those paths once they're given to people, even if they think they don't, even if they don't think they don't want to, they will. And so that actually guided a lot of my work around things like change management, or so sometimes you want a customer to want things, other times you just build a road that they're going to follow.
It, like now we are already stepping into Lean Six Sigma.
You can't divide it, can you?
What was that like for from your personal, I would say, experience? Did you did you have a background in Six Sigma before you started at Canada Post, or was it like learn on the job, or
That's a good question. I'd been trained a little bit in it in university, so I'd taken some classes on it. And when I was working at that job installing the Pi servers and stuff, I think that data management and figuring out how to minimize the amount, you know how if you've got too many steps with the data, sometimes you can you make it too complicated, it'll
yeah?
break, that kind of thing. There's probably a technical word for it, which I don't know, but if you do that,
And now with AI, all these AI tools, we're like repeating the wrong stuff from the past again. Eh?
yeah,
We again come in this very complex change with a lot of interdependencies, where a lot of
yeah,
links
towers of
can
cards,
fail.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, towers of cards, or what do they call them? Those machines that the overly complicated machines that do very simple things.
Goldberg. I don't know.
Goldberg machines. That's right. Yeah,
Goldberg
yeah.
machines.
Oh,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, yeah. Goldberg
Willem,
I
machines.
was thinking about the
kudos.
Goldberg
Yeah,
variations,
it
but
was a,
that's something else.
yeah, yeah. The Goldberg machines. Yeah. So you really have to avoid that, and I think that that's true. That was true in those kind of like IT, OT related things. And then from that, I kind of like, looked at like recognized that that was an issue. And so when I started really delving deeply into lean primarily and a little bit of Six Sigma, which kind of came on a bit more later, I recognized where I could apply it later. I actually, so, the Postal Service being involved in lean, we were actually a member of the South Saskatchewan Manufacturing Consortium. And so there was a consortium of manufacturers that were lean people. And one of the people that I worked with at Canada Post, he was kind of a coworker of mine. He was kind of he had the former president. He had started up this lean consortium, and so we met with manufacturers every few months. We'd go to a different facility. We'd talk about lean generally. We'd go and tour their facility. They'd show us a problem they had or a solution they made, and we'd learn from each other. And that was a really really great experience and a good way to learn. And these manufacturers 100% knew that the mail processing was very similar. And some of the changes that were made, we made some really good changes in publications and ad mail, which is a very heavy, dense type of mail that then ends up having to be single flyers in somebody's mailbox kind of thing.
Yeah.
That was we made some really good changes there to avoid the double handling, um, situation. Um, for sure. One of the interesting, maybe an interesting story about Canada Post. There was a facility that received mail from far out. It came in on a truck, like it's a small amount of mail, maybe like 4 little tubs of mail every day, and for that mail to make the next truck out to another place, they only had like an hour or two. So what those people would do is they would take those 4 tubs of mail and then make sure to sort them into into a case so that they could pull like 5 letters out of one slot in that case and make sure that it went to the other town the next day. And that was way far advanced from what the required mail delivery timelines were, but they really felt strongly about good customer service. So what they were doing is they were making sure those 4 letters got great customer service and maybe 2,000 other letters didn't. Or you overprocessed
Yeah.
everything to make sure you got those 4 letters out, and that was a really key learning for me.
The link between Lean Six Sigma and data, you already mentioned it a couple of times. That's also you can't unsee data from Six Sigma and vice versa. Eh? And
Mm-hmm.
I think in the especially on our blog, we often talk about, or we often write about how do you build a data platform, and let's also discuss a bit of data management later on. But what we don't really talk about too much is why, why would you? What is the value of becoming data driven? And I think when you link that to this type of optimization problems, then there might be or there hopefully is a clear link.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Actually, it is so essential, and like the why for me, and this is only in my mind is that it's actually about people. Like when you are trying to motivate people to do the things that need to be done to make an organization successful, you need to find a way to motivate them, because people only do what they want to do. That's it, right? Like in like motivational theory or whatever, like they only do what they want to do, and so you have to figure out a way for them to want to do it. And so one of the ways is encouraging them, maybe with like money or just kind words, or obvious signs of success. Or another way would be like discouraging them from doing bad things, like punishing them by taking away money if they don't do well, or um, like being mean to them in front of other people or something like that, right? And so I think one of the reasons why it's so important to do good data work is that people naturally want to be successful. And so one of the ways that you can help them want to do what you want them to do is by giving them a scoreboard, just like in sports or whatever. I've played sports my whole life. By giving them a scoreboard that allows them to measure themselves and see whether they've been successful, really quickly and really easily. But you have to make sure that those numbers are things that they can control, that are also important to the business and show success. That like targets are achievable, that systems can't be gamed, right? Because people will, like, there's always perverse consequences, or at least unintended consequences, and sometimes they can be counterproductive. And so I think the real reason why data is so important is because in the end, you need to get people to do what you want them to do, and you need them to want to do it too.
I really like that insight. It's another approach than what we typically or other people typically talk about. I want to do a little bit of a fast forward to your more recent roles, because you recently
I've secretly been talking about them and you didn't even know it.
But you recently did a talk also more on treating data or data systems as products.
Yeah.
That's maybe, Willem, a topic I'd like to do a bit of a deep dive in. Is you know what? Why don't we start with defining what is a product?
Oh.
Start with an easy question,
I would
David.
love
Start with an easy
I would love it if you guys started with that. That sounds good. If you could define what a product is. What is a product? Well, I think that a product is anything built for a customer they're willing to pay for. Really. And so when, like linking in the lean stuff, like a product would be, you have to be customer focused, and that was one of the basis of success, was kind of like that business need and collaboration. Like you really have to understand what people want, and then you have to be able to deliver it with good value, right? So it either has to be really, if it's expensive to make, it's got to be high value that people are willing to pay for. And the paying for thing, I'm not just talking about money. And I know, like, as a Canadian, I might get associated with North American capitalism, that sort of thing. But like, honestly, when I say pay for, I don't just mean money. Like, people pay with their effort, people pay with their time. So if you're collaborating with people and you're working with them, doing business analysis work with them, trying to understand their business, and you're asking them to share, they need to see value out of that. So that is a really important thing. And one of the things I talked about at that presentation I did at the start, I did a safety moment, right? I did a process safety moment. And one of the things about the process safety moment, it was an industry standard a well-known process safety event. They're in the States, they have the Chemical Safety Board, and they do really, really great documents and presentation. They're excellent. We don't have.
Well, I'll put a link in the article, because sorry to interrupt here, but when I was studying, so that's 17, 18 or so years ago, like I remember that I was already watching the videos created by the Chemical Safety Board about for me, that was my personal first experience with chemical safety before I ever stepped foot in a in a chemical
facility.
plant.
In what
Mhm.
But the
context did
content
you
is
get
brilliant.
that? You did mathematical engineering, David. In what context did you get that? I mean,
I did mathematical engineering, but I started specializing in process optimization.
okay, then it
Yeah.
makes
So
sense. Then it
that's
makes
the link
sense.
with chemical processes, and
Mhm.
you
Okay.
know.
Because if you had
Yeah.
like chemical safety courses, yes, of course. But
Yeah. You mustn't separate things though, right? Like, I mean, it really is important to have a broad background. It allows you, like if you're studying and then you're entering the workforce, no matter what you at least my experience has been like, no matter what you specialize in, you end up getting a job that you kind of at the start you need, right? And no matter what it is, you've got to be successful at it. You got to be okay at it, and so you have to learn. And it might not be exactly in the field that you selected for your major or whatever.
I think ITOT integration was a field in our no.
Yeah, it doesn't even is it? I don't even know. I wish
Anyway, so you
In
started
any
the
case,
presentation. Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt. You started the
not at all.
presentation with the
Oh yeah,
safety
process safety
moment.
moment. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and the CSB is great, and they got a ton of good resources on YouTube and on their website. And so what I did is I talked about the process safety moment, and I said kind of some things that some recommendations that it made, and that we could consider at our facility. And then I said some things about those solutions that could be provided by the data analytics, what we called the data analytics solution that we are providing. And so in that way, what I was doing was I was giving a process safety moment, which was an expectation of, meetings, most of the time you should do a process safety moment at the start of a meeting in that context. And so what I did is not only did I do a safety moment where people learned, but also I showed them that there was a product that we were delivering that would help them with that if they, came along with us, right? And I wasn't doing that sort of thing in meetings kicking off data analytics meetings. I was doing that in meetings with leadership about performance. And so it was a completely different thing. Like the topic of the meeting was completely different, but I was taking every opportunity to just give people little tastes of what could be achieved if we did the right thing and if we committed together to doing that work.
I really like that focus now a bit more on safety, because I think usually, again, David, when we're talking about data, it's like process
Mm-hmm.
optimization and
Mm-hmm.
how can we spend less, how can we produce more. Rarely
Mm-hmm.
though do we have people who have some experiences in how do we actually use data in health and safety,
Oh,
environmental topics. So
yeah.
I think that's a
Yeah.
really interesting topic. Where does data fit in there? Because I'm sure there's like management of change and
Hmm.
data sheets and stuff like that. But what's more? What's there?
For sure. It is very like there's a lot of opportunities to do data work in especially process safety, also personal safety. I would say that generally my experience has been that personal safety people don't come from as much of an engineering and math type background, and so they're not it's generally not as sophisticated or kind of like not as data mature in those parts of organizations or even in those professions. In process safety, it's generally a bit more mature. What you'll see is, for example, the American Petroleum Institute (API) has a recommended practice called 754. I think it's process safety metrics and indicators or something like that is the recommended practice title. And it has like an appendix and annex in it that basically goes through from start to finish exactly how you should structure your data management system. Like it literally just lays it right out there.
Really?
Um, oh yeah, yeah. And so I would carry that around. I still have a copy, and I would carry that around and show people like anytime that people would ask a question like this, like, well, how does this fit in? I would say, oh, well, like, there's actually a recommendation of how that should fit in. It's one of the recommended metrics. This is how the information systems should be structured. This is how the reporting should be structured. This is how we should deal with leadership. This is how middle management should deal with it. This is how the front line should be treated about it. So there's textbooks. There's a really great document too on from the British Health and Safety Executive. It's called HSG 254, and I can't think of the name of it, but it's something about process safety metrics as well, and it lays out a step-by-step method of selecting metrics, and the entire metrics hierarchy for setting up a process safety system. And it works. A full example of one of the dimensions of process safety. It's a tremendous document. I highly recommend it. Available free download on the internet. I'll get you the link, David, and you can put
Yeah,
in
now I'm
put in the links to
interested.
it. It's excellent. So there's tons of really good documentation on how to use data. There are some areas that really lend themselves to data. The fact that HAZOP and LOPA, I don't know if you're maybe the
Yeah.
listeners aren't, hazard and operability studies. So like doing a study, understanding using guiding questions, what bad situations could happen. Where would you have a high pressure that would cause a problem, a low pressure, high temperature, low flows, misdirected flows, all of these sorts of kind of like situations that could happen, and what would be the consequences, what would be the risk of that, how many barriers do we need in place? So that kind of like that barrier theory that started coming up a lot in the public during the COVID times, that barrier management thing, and having many layers of protection, right? And LOPA is kind of like a deeper study similar to HAZOP, where it's literally layers of protection analysis, right? And so you're using you're using like numeric analysis to determine how many layers you need and how much risk reduction you're going to get from certain barriers, right? And so all of that is very, very data heavy, and some of the best data workers that I personally know, not me, work in that space for sure. Like people that I am very impressed by and who I call to ask questions from time to time, because I know that they're the people who think about data in the best ways some of the time. Another area would be incident management. There's lots of statistics there. And then like how all of the processes, is back to lean, all of those step-by-step processes like MOC, like would be another one. Oh, like projects, and making sure that projects have like safety considerations in them. You can measure aspects of certain steps to make sure, right? And then if you have that data captured in systems, and if you're able to represent it in valuable ways that are meaningful to people, that help them get what they want. Like people hate MOC because they feel like it's time consuming, right? The thing is just documenting your due diligence anyway. And so if you can do a metric on reducing the time it takes to do an MOC, say, and you do that by increasing the efficiency of it, not by making people work harder, then it's a win-win, right? And so there are ways. One last thing is audit. Audit is just a really excellent. And I was actually I was like the element lead for that element at the refinery. And we were really getting some good things set up with audit. And audit obviously lends itself very much to measurement.
How manual was that work, though? In my experience,
The
there's
audit
like
work?
I just mean the data gathering and analysis.
Oh,
And there's
that's
always
a good
this view
question.
of everything is automated in systems, and AI is gonna spit out all the answers for you out of data in the cloud, and then you set foot in a shop floor and you see like there's paper forms, there's Excel sheets everywhere.
Yeah.
What did you see?
Um, so we were on our second generation of health and safety software platform. And because I was involved in the implementation of it when we were doing the data warehousing and business intelligence stuff, I found it pretty easy because I was pretty familiar with the data structure, and it had been intentionally set up. Like the incident module had been intentionally set up to align with that API 754, the process safety metric standard. And so any information that it said you must gather on any sort of incident was gathered as part of that. And so right from the start, instead of the field entering it on paper and there having to be transcription and stuff, the supervisors of the workers who in the area that experienced the event, they would enter that information directly. Yeah. And so then from there, it pretty much was automated. And the cloud and AI and on-prem and all of that stuff is another conversation.
To say, given your background with all these different systems, the data management question, or I would say, let's make it more concrete for the ones who
Thank you.
don't have any formal data management yet. It's often really hard to start. like
Mm.
if there would be an advice you can give people on how and where to start with data management, what would it be?
Or even what does it solve?
What does it solve?
Is the
Mhm.
data gonna unmanage itself? Is it gonna ask for a raise, or is it gonna go to competition?
I think maybe data management is about it. Data not unmanaging itself, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. These are excellent questions. So good that I actually have to think about them for a moment here.
That's a nice thing of hosting a podcast, Chris.
Yeah,
So the
yeah.
fact is, we don't have the answer either, but you know, we can.
We can ask.
They are, yeah, and I really appreciate good questions for sure. And it's good to flex the thinking muscles. Where to start? Back to paper and Excel, I do think that doing the work manually first really helps. Like
Yeah.
it. So way back at my first job, I ended up going. It's kind of a long story, but I ended up going with the consultancy to a job in Aberdeen in Scotland, and I worked on, and this would have been in 2005, 2006, and there was a team of, I don't know, 30 or so developers and that sort of thing working on this project, and we were kind of like business analysts, and we did training, and we did like customer information gathering, that kind of thing, and we did pie work there as well, kind of like technical business analysis around that. And what one of the things that I learned there was that we were trying to get the developers to do certain things, and they would be asking us kind of like roundabout ways about the algorithm, like how would we do that? And we'd explain it to them kind of like in pretty fluffy terms, and they would say, well, like, can you build it for us, like in Excel? Because if you can't build it for us in Excel, like we can't do anything that Excel can't do, really. So if you can't show us how the algorithm is going to calculate from the inputs to the outputs, if you can't show that using like the formulas in Excel, then we can't do it either. And that was a really key learning, because it's really useful to do prototyping using very simple tools. At Canada Post, this guy who was really great at lean. One of the best things he did was he would do presentations with like hundreds and hundreds of slides on them, and he would move little, like we were doing a parcel conveyor project, and he would move little parcels and show people the parcels would move here, and then they'd wait for this person to make a decision, and that could go here or it could go here, and he would just move these little parcels and little simple animations in PowerPoint, and people loved it because it was so understandable. And so you do things like that, or you would use, instead of doing CAD, you'd have like pieces of paper with magnets that were the size of all the different containers, because container management was so
Yeah.
important. And you would have like people from the floor showing you how they thought things should be laid out, doing like CAD, like computer assisted design with little magnets on pieces of paper.
I think it shows what's a very interesting learning or takeaway from this is that it shows that data management is something which is hard to push down from top to
Mm-hmm.
bottom.
Mm-hmm.
Because we often get that question like, yeah, but management wants to see this and this, so we're going to push down some certain initiatives. And what you're saying is you need to find some common ground between the
Mm-hmm.
practitioners, the people who actually understand what is going on. And
Mm-hmm.
obviously, and that's of course the challenge, also somehow aligning that with company standards, especially if you are operating on multi-sites with multi-site customers, that somehow those two need to align, and that's not too easy, but it's certainly possible if you have both dimensions. So if you have the practitioners, and if you have a set of company guidelines.
Yeah, like the well-defined guidelines would really help. Like if you had, in a way, like it kind of sounds like the company, or kind of the centralized site would have some sort of like almost like a rule set for a result that they expect. And so you know what the result is, right? Like you know what the product needs to look like, and you know what you have, or you could maybe consider what you might be able to make, right? And from that, then what you need to do is you've got two sets of constraints, and you can use the inputs and the outputs to build the process that will get you the result that you need. I think that that maybe people need to work on the flexibility of the rules a little bit too. And I know that in the IT space, that's in some ways maybe harder, but sometimes when people say that they need something very specific, what they mean is they need something like that. Like they're looking for a result, but they might say how to get the result as well as the result that they need. And my experience has been like because I'm not an IT person and I'm not a super super technical engineer, I haven't done a lot of design work, for example, right? And so for that reason, I end up doing a lot of translation between groups of people that I'm neither of them, but I kind of translate in between, right? And so when somebody asks for something like like head office will ask for something, I'll hear it, and an IT person will hear it in the same meeting maybe. And the
Mm-hmm.
IT person will say, well, I can't do that because these technical reasons. And after the meeting, I might go to that IT person and say, like, I heard what they were asking for and I heard what you answered. Is there a way of getting this result not following what they said in the middle? Do you have a way of doing that though? And they say, oh yeah, well we could do it this way. And then I'd say, well, what if we did that? Like what if we propose that we do that instead of what they said? And you could go to that management person, you could tell them what the suggestion. They say, yeah, that's what I was asking for. Because they don't understand.
Obvious.
Like they're using
Yeah,
like IT nouns. They're
yeah, of
nouns. Like
course.
they're like placeholders. They're like X's and Y's for them. They're variables. They don't really know what they mean. They just really want the result. They don't care about how.
That's usually also best if the how is left to the people who actually need to
Mm,
implement it.
it's true.
Now
They're just trying to explain the situation that they don't understand it completely, right? Like, I mean,
they're
yeah,
trying to do their best, all of
yeah,
us. Um,
yeah.
Now, Kris, one final question because we do need to start closing here. Um, you started saying like that you did a lot of different things in different fields and how that was enriching. You just
Hmm.
started now in a new job.
Hmm.
What will you do different in this job compared to with what you learned in your previous one? What are you bringing to this job?
Okay, well,
It
those are
sounds
two
like an
different things,
interview. It
maybe.
sounds like an interview question almost, but
Yeah, no, it's okay. Uh, I think the thing is that like I have demonstrated experience and practice doing a really wide variety of things. So what I bring is like the ability to come on board quickly, the ability to work with kind of like data management, doing simulation and modeling, with customer focus, with lean, with Six Sigma, which we didn't end up talking a lot about. We didn't really, I kind of mentioned it as an aside, but like performance-based leadership, kind of that kind of applied behavioral analysis, kind of that psychological approach of like
That's
how to
interesting.
motivate people. Yeah, that's a whole nother could be a whole other
Oh
podcast.
damn!
But like so I bring all of these different practices, and not all of them have to do with engineering, and they're things that I picked up through like leadership or reading, even
Is
things
this
like
is a
philosophy,
combination
right?
of all these different?
Hmm.
I think it
And
also links a
applying
bit.
them at different situations.
Yeah, I think this comes a
Yeah.
bit back like a discussion we had slightly before the podcast
Hmm.
um, about the difference between complicated and complex work, which
Right.
is I don't
Yeah.
know if all the listeners are familiar with it, but it's definitely worth looking it up.
Hmm.
Different types of work. You can be very specialized in something. It can be very complicated to build.
Hmm. Hmm.
I mean, transportation mechanisms, separation. I mean, it's all lots of very specialized work, very often very complicated.
Hmm. Yeah.
The work that you're working in, I think also a lot of our listeners, is usually a bit more in that complex domain where the problems are not
Hmm.
always well defined. It's like that manager coming in,
Hmm.
saying something. He didn't come with a spec sheet and saying, I want these different processes installed that are already defined. And it's going to be hard to
Yeah.
install them, but they're already known.
Yeah.
It's rather,
Yeah.
we need to figure out how we're going to do this. And that's maybe
Yeah.
where that wider experience comes in handy, where
Yeah.
maybe something
Yeah.
you did in a postal office many years
Hmm.
ago suddenly becomes relevant.
And working with people, right? That is like,
Always.
you all, it's so essential. Th- um, I think the thing is that it's so important not to complexify things, right? Like it's so important not to build that house of cards kind of situation, right? You must come to the simplest solution, and as you gain, more knowledge, more skill, more experience, what ends up happening is you recognize how to make things simple and break things down. So like we have infinite number of inputs nearly. We don't really know exactly we don't know what the result should look like other than that we need a result. And we have many tools that we can apply, and we've got to pick which ones. And so how can we break that down? And there's a number of experts on the team that are that know how to do a lot of technical things, and they all bring their parts, but kind of like organizing that and getting them into a place where things are simple and they feel comfortable. Because one of the things that I'm bringing to this role is a desire to not choose to take on too much for myself.
So important as well. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And by the way, because Willem mentioned complex versus complicated, for those who want to know a bit more about the differences, I highly advise you to read the book Sooner, Safer, Happier.
It will make you
there
happier.
there is a brilliant explanation of the.
We can put the link also in the
Yeah,
show notes.
I'll put the link in the show notes.
I mean, the writers are great. I mean,
no, but there is a brilliant explanation on the complex versus complicated.
Yeah.
Work.
If you haven't,
with that, so for the ones who are watching this episode, it almost feels a little bit like a travel documentary, because when we started, like your backdrop, Kris, was still black.
Oh, yeah.
And
yes, it was as if I was looking into, I don't know, some office in the background, and now
well, black, there was a reflection, and so now we see the beautiful snowy, if I can see
it
the beautiful snowy landscape behind you.
Yeah. It's not too cold. We're in Celsius in Canada. I think it started out -15 or so not too cold. This weekend it's going above 0, but normally this time of year it's usually down -20 as a high usually.
Wow, no, that's cold.
Yeah.
Anyways, with that, or on that note, that's another wrap for another super insightful episode of the ITOT Insider Podcast. Thank you very much, Kris.
Yeah, thanks, David. Thanks, Willem.
Donating your time to us and our listeners.
It's been such a pleasure.
And of course, to our listeners, if you enjoyed our conversation, don't forget to subscribe at itotinsider.com. Or if you want to learn more, you can go to itot.academy. And with that, Willem, the only thing we can say, until the next time, take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
See ya.